Sawadee krab. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to Thailand Focus 2021, organized by the Stock Exchange of Thailand. This year is the 15th year of Thailand Focus, which is the premier event of the Thai capital market and the largest portfolio investment conference in Thailand. This year's theme is Thriving in the Next Normal, highlighting issues through global pandemic of COVID-19, how our country deals with the situation, and what will be the next steps post-COVID-19. The session will start from a welcome address by Dr. Pakorn Peetakavatchai, President of the Stock Exchange of Thailand, followed by an opening speech and keynote address, Shaping Thailand's Readiness for Post-COVID-19 Economic Opportunities, by the Minister of Finance, Mr. Akom Termpithiyapaisit. Please note that questions can be submitted through the QR code shown on screen. May I now invite Dr. Pakorn Peetakavatchai, President of the Stock Exchange of Thailand, to deliver his welcome address.
Minister of Finance, Mr. Akom Termpithiyapaisit, Governor of the Bank of Thailand, Dr. Sethaput Suthiwat Naruput, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to our flagship annual Inbound Roadshow event, Thailand Focus, a 3-day virtual conference and a showcase of Thai capital market to investors all over the world. As we all aware, the pandemic has touched every arm of life. Almost 2 years since the outbreak, people have adapted and changed their way of living, including the way we organize today's event to be in a virtual format. In what follows, we will hear from policymakers, top executives, key opinion leaders, and experts about key challenges, public policy, business adaptation, investment opportunities, and success story of innovation and sustainability that will thrive in the next normal of Thai capital market. There are opportunities lie in every crisis. Thai capital market has proved its resiliency with a quick recovery after the outbreak. Despite the pandemic, the Stock Exchange of Thailand has successfully delivered the following result. That is one of the most preferred venue for IPO. In 2020, our IPO value was around $5 billion, ranked among top 10 in the world, top 5 in Asia, and number 1 in ASEAN. For the first half of this year, a strong IPO deal flow continued with the IPO value reaching $3 billion already. That is the most liquid exchange in ASEAN. The average daily turnover has jumped to well above $3 billion in this year from $2.2 billion last year, thanks to our good mix of investor base and steady supplies of the new listed companies. Set listed companies are among the leaders in sustainability practice, winning award and recognition. 21 set listed companies are included in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, the highest number in ASEAN, and recently, Thailand was ranked number 1 among ASEAN countries for achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goal. To thrive further, that focus on ensuring a smooth transition to the next normal by embracing new digital technology and enhancing connectivity for investors to global market to strengthen its competitiveness in the following areas. On ESG data platform, that is developing an online disclosure platform with structured data template to promote availability of comparable ESG data for investors and other data users, creating value from a listed company disclosure. On global product platform, that will develop global product issuing and trading platform to connect with investment opportunity abroad through exchange traded fund and depository receipt program. The platform will provide convenience to intermediary and customer to offer and invest in cross-border assets in the local market. On digital infrastructure, SET will further improve the capital market digital infrastructure with new services. We have worked in collaboration with key players to better serve our market participants through various e-services such as e-AGM, e-proxy voting, and e-KYC. In the pipeline, a digital asset platform scheduled to be launched in 2022 will offer new businesses and provide investors with a more diverse range of investment alternatives. To conclude, sustainable business and investment, leveraging on digital technology and regional and global connectivity will be focused in our strategy for thriving. In today's conference, we will hear more challenges and opportunities in the next normal from our excellent line of speakers, panelists, and moderators. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce the next session that will be the keynote address by His Excellency, Minister of Finance, Mr. Akom Termpithaya Phaisit. Please welcome His Excellency.
Distinguished global investors, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to deliver this keynote address to the Thailand Focus 2021 conference organized by the Stock Exchange of Thailand. Today's conference comes at an opportune time as we continue our efforts to overcome the pandemic while working towards ensuring Thailand's readiness to thrive the post-COVID world. I would like to share with you some of my perspective on key issues including Thailand economic outlook, recent government's economic stimulus package, medium and long-term policy direction, and roles and expectation of capital market in post-COVID-19. Yet, not to mention the Lambda variant that emerged in some countries. Distinguished participants, let me begin by providing you with some views on Thailand's economic prospect and the impact from COVID-19. As you are aware, Thai economy has severely been affected by a series of COVID-19 outbreaks. Last year, Thailand successfully contained the spread of the virus. However, like many other countries in the region, the highly contagious Delta variant has proven to be much more difficult to contain and has spread more widely at a much faster rate. The government once again had to act quickly to divert necessary resources to assist the healthcare system and workers, reintroduce containment measures to curb the rising infection rates and save lives. As expected, the containment measures reduce economic activities and mobility of the people, leading to the interruption of our economic recovery and growth prospect for 2021. In this regard, the Ministry of Finance has revised the economic growth projection of the Thai economy in 2021 to 1.3% due to the latest wave of the COVID-19 outbreak that began towards the end of the second quarter this year. The revision were mainly due to the impact of the tourism sector and the reduction of the domestic economic activities. In particular, domestic spending has significantly been affected by COVID-19. However, many government support programs, including co-payment and Shop More, Get More, have helped sustain the level of domestic consumption. Such support will continue as they are critical to future growth prospects of our economy. On the other hand, economic recovery of our major trading partners has increased the demand for our export. We expect that The pickup in merchandise export will be the key driver in supporting Thai economy by the end of this year. According to the latest figure, we already saw total export value expanded by almost 16% Y-on-Y in first half of 2021. And export in June also expanded strongly by 44% year-on-year, the highest growth in 11 years. We can also see the increase in private investment during the first half of 2021, as reflected by the expansion of the capital goods importation by 14.5% Y-on-Y. Despite the high growth of 7.5% Y-on-Y in the second quarter of this year, but we still see the weakening of the economy as observed through less than 1% Q-on-Q since the beginning of this year. With the second and third wave of spreading of the COVID-19, it is believed that the recovery would take much longer time than expected. This leads to the revision of economic forecasts by various economic agencies, both government and private sectors. For instance, the Bank of Thailand has recently projected GDP growth at 0.7% in 2021 and recovery at 3.7% in 2022, while the National Economic and Social Development Council has also revised their forecast down to 0.7 to 1.2%, down from 1.5 to 2.5% in 2021. However, for 2022, the government would put our utmost efforts to stimulate the economy, especially gradual reopening the economy by implementing the Phuket Sandbox and Samui Plus model, which now extend to our tourist provinces, all in the southern region. With the improvement of the COVID-19 situation, the government would keep our economic growth target at 4 to 5% in 2022. Distinguished guests, allow me to touch upon our recent economic policies to support the economy. Since the beginning of the outbreak last year, we have moved quickly to ensure that funds are available to support all COVID-19 related issues, in particular, the procurement of vaccines and accelerating the vaccination. 2 emergency loan decrees with a total of 1.5 trillion baht were enacted. The first 1 trillion baht emergency loan decree has mostly been implemented, and the second emergency loan decree of 500 billion baht is available from now until the end of next fiscal year. Some of the fiscal programs that the Ministry of Finance has rolled out so far includes: first, We Win scheme, an additional 1,000 baht per person cash handout for qualified people each week for 2 weeks. Second, cash handout to state welfare card holders, giving an additional monthly allowance of 200 baht per month for 6 months to state welfare card holders. Third, cash handout to people who need special assistance, providing a monthly handout of 200 baht per month via Thai citizen ID cards for 6 months. Fourth, co-payment half phase 3. Co-payment scheme which allow registered individuals to receive 50% subsidy for their daily expenses. Fifth, Shop More, Get More scheme, which the government will provide a cashback e-voucher to people who buy products, foods and services from VAT registered stores and outlets. On top of that, the latest program launched last month were to implement the cash handout program for those workers who are under Social Security system of Article 33, 39, and 40 for own account workers, as well as the compensation for the SME and MSMEs who employ not more than 200 workers. The programs also include the tuition fees for school children and university students. The utilities bills, both electricity and water, have also been partly paid by the government budget to help the household's burden. On financial measures, the Ministry of Finance, through the policy guidance to specialized financial institutions or SFIs, and in close coordination with the Bank of Thailand, have come up with a 2-month debt suspension for small and medium-sized enterprises. The SMEs have been hard hit by the latest containment measures and will continue to receive strong support as they are the backbone of our economy. In addition, there are various measures to alleviate corporate and household debts, as well as to enhance financial liquidity, such as soft loans, credit guarantee, debt suspension, debt clinic, and debt mediation. I would like to take this opportunity to emphasize that our fiscal position remains strong. Even after the significant increase in borrowings, the latest debt to GDP remains low compared to our peers at 56.1% and is expected to remain below 60% at the end of this fiscal year. This was a result of many years of prudent management and fiscal discipline. Going forward, if there is a need to increase our debt ceiling, the Fiscal Policy Committee set up under the State Fiscal and Financial Discipline Act can revisit and raise this threshold. In addition, it is important to highlight that we have been able to ensure fiscal discipline even in time of rising public debt level, mainly because of our capability to maintain relatively low interest payments. This was a result of a diversified borrowing strategy made possible by the deep and liquid local currency bond market. Moreover, accommodative monetary policies allow interest rates to be at historical low. The low interest environment is expected to be maintained until economic recovery is back on track. Close coordination between Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Thailand will continue to ensure sufficient liquidity in enabling the government to pursue further economic policy and fiscal stimulus measures without compromising our strong fiscal position. That is why Thailand continues to receive strong assessment from all international ratings agencies, all of which has reaffirmed our credit ratings and outlook. Distinguished guests, as we continue our battle with the COVID-19 pandemic, the government also prepared for reopening the economy to ensure that Thailand is ready to thrive once COVID is finally over. Pandemic has not altered our objectives. In fact, it has strengthened our resolve to thrive towards growth that not only sustainable, but also inclusive and environment friendly. Please allow me to highlight some strategies that we have put in place to lay a foundation for Thailand's long-term growth. First, addressing the issue of inequality by promoting equal opportunities for all. Economic recovery from the pandemic may be uneven, further exacerbating the problems of inequality. In light of this, government is committed to reduce poverty while creating equal opportunity for the people by creating a functional and accessible social safety net. For example, we have introduced a state welfare card to reduce financial burdens for the lower income groups. Second, continue to invest in infrastructure. In the past 6 years, the government has continued to invest in infrastructure projects, including roads, railways, aviation, and energy. These projects are key to Thailand's competitiveness and will also strengthen regional connectivity for the ASEAN region and beyond. Moreover, we have put resources into the Eastern Economic Corridor as catalyst to innovation and future industries. Diversifies funding sources from borrowing to public-private partnership or PPP have been made available to support these projects. Third, reducing greenhouse gas and addressing climate change. The government has set the goal to reach zero carbon emission by 2065. In this aspect, Thailand's national agenda include promoting electric vehicle industry, alternative energy, bio-circular green or BCG model, and reducing carbon emission in the manufacturing industry and reforestation, of course. Green financing has also been utilized in the form of sustainability bond to further support the global fight against climate change. Fourth, strengthening our competitive industry. We must support potential industry that Thailand has competitive advantage, such as food, both in innovating and processing, medical hub, logistic hub, and sustainable tourism. Fifth, promoting future industries. To reach a higher income status, Thailand needs to transform and promote new industry that respond to the global demand. 13 new target industry will lead to higher productivity and income for the people. Thailand aims to promote digital and data center, smart electronics, biochemical, and 6, creating strength and competitiveness for MSME. MSME sector is important to our economy, representing about 42% of GDP. The government is working on promoting new entrepreneurs and startups, increasing access to financing, and creating opportunity to participate in government procurement. Distinguished guests, let me now turn to the roles of the capital market. Thailand's well-balanced capital market has not only been key in supporting Thailand's economic development and competitiveness, but it also allows the economy to better manage and absorb shocks. Looking forward, there is a need to further promote efficiency of the capital markets in order to support the post-COVID-19 economy. Capital market in Thailand for the future should be as follows. First, a place for the new source of fund for SME and new startups that will promote new innovation and new businesses. Second, a source of financing channel for public and private sector to raise new funds for investing in physical and digital infrastructure projects. Third, a place to leverage the leading companies that ultimately will become regional and global corporations. Fourth, a place for transparent and ethical companies that adhere to sustainable development goals. Fifth, a place for financial exchange using up-to-date technology. Sixth, a place for participation involving diverse investor group of domestic and foreign. And 7, a place for regulatory and financial transparency and minority investment investor protection. Moreover, in post-COVID-19 world, The economic growth will be driven by the new industry, such as electric vehicles and digital economy. The capital market will play a crucial role in fundraising for their high value-added industries and providing financial support for startups. I'm very pleased to note that Stock Exchange of Thailand has introduced live platform as a way to raise funds for SME and startups. I hope in the future we will see more capital market innovations from the Stock Exchange of Thailand. Distinguished guests, the road ahead will not be so rosy. Many challenges and uncertainties remain. But it is certain that the government is committed to do its utmost to overcome the pandemic. And with the strong and continuous support from all sectors, I believe that we can look forward to a post-COVID economy that is full of opportunity for all. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to once again thank all for participating in today's conference. I'm very confident that the many prominent speakers today will also provide you with even more insights into Thailand's plan in shaping our post-COVID future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Akom, for the opening speech. For the next session, we will listen to the information update on the topic of From Resiliency to Recovery and Beyond, Central Bank Policies for an Uncertain World by Dr. Sethaput Suttiwat Naruput, Governor of the Bank of Thailand.
Distinguished participants, it's a great pleasure and a privilege for me to be here today to address the 15th Thailand Focus. And let me thank the Stock Exchange of Thailand for inviting me to give my remarks today. I'd like to cover three areas today. First, I'd like to share with you my thoughts about the economic outlook for Thailand. Secondly, talk about what we at the Bank of Thailand have been doing to respond to this crisis. And thirdly, to share with you a bit about what we're likely to do going forward. So first, on the economic outlook. I think it's very fair to say that Thailand has been hit very hard by the COVID crisis, harder than a lot of our neighboring countries. And as a result, our economic recovery is likely to be slow and lag that of the region. There are a couple of reasons for this. First and foremost is the fact that Thailand as an economy, certainly as a share of GDP, relies very heavily on tourism. Tourism accounts for about 11 to 12% of our GDP, and that's 2 to 3 times higher as a share of GDP than what it is in the other neighboring countries. And tourism, as we all know, is one of the sectors that's likely to recover much slower than other sectors. And this will be a drag on the extent and the speed of our recovery. The second thing is that our vaccine rollout has admittedly and unfortunately been slower than that of the region. If you look again at the share of the population that's received 2 doses of vaccines in Thailand, it currently stands at about 7% of the population. And again, that's flags that of other countries in the region, countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines. And the fact that we've been hit hard again by this third wave with the subsequent lockdown that's come in place indicates to us that the recovery is likely to be bumpy going forward as well, and that the likelihood of trying to achieve a large share of the population that's vaccinated will take some time. The second feature of the recovery is that it's likely also to be highly uneven. If you look now at what's been happening in Thailand, we see what most analysts have been calling a K-shaped recovery. Certain sectors are doing very well. If you look, for example, our export sectors, those sectors have recovered basically back to where they were prior to the crisis, and are producing and exporting at levels before what they saw ahead of the crisis, before the crisis. But other sectors, notably the service sectors in general, and those that cater specifically to tourism, have been lagging. And certain sectors, as we know, things like hotels, and restaurants are lagging very significantly and experience a great degree of hardship. The reason that this has hit the economy particularly hard is that tourism, aside from accounting for that large chunk of GDP that I mentioned earlier, accounts for an even larger share of employment. Tourism, both directly and indirectly, accounts for roughly about 20% of total employment in Thailand. So the employment and income hit to our economy as a result of COVID has been very, very high as a result. And that is, again, another factor that will characterize both as the slower recovery and the likely uneven nature of the recovery going forward. But while we've been hit hard, I think one thing that we can say also is that the economy has proven to be quite resilient. And that if we look ahead, again, Thailand is an economy where despite the big shocks have been hitting us as a result of COVID, the downside risks to the economy remain quite limited. And that's the result of our low vulnerabilities in a lot of critical areas. We look, for example, first off, at our external position. Thailand is an economy which has very low external vulnerability. We're very resilient to balance of payments type shocks. And why is that? Largely, again, it has to do with the fact that we have a very low level of external debt and a relatively high amount of foreign reserves, certainly relative to our external debt. So, for example, recently we've seen a weakening of the baht, and the baht has weakened by about 10% year to date, and that's outpaced what other countries in the region have experienced in terms of the current weakening of the currency. The resiliency of the Thai economy, the strength of the Thai economy in the external front, I think remains very solidly intact. I think there are a couple of reasons that have underpinned the fact that the baht has weakened, but these have to do again with the fact that the current account, which traditionally has been in surplus, this year has swung into a deficit, as a result of the contraction in tourism. But again, the size of the current account deficit, certainly relative to the amount of international reserves that we have, is not that worrisome. If you look, for example, this year, we see that on the current account side, we year to date are seeing a current account deficit of something on the order of about $9 billion US dollars to date. If you add on top of that the portfolio flows, what we've seen is year to date again flows out of the equity markets on the order of about 3.2 billion US dollars. But at the same time, we've seen inflows coming to the bond markets of 2.2 billion. So on net, on the portfolio side, we see outflows of about $1 billion. Add on top of that the current account deficit of 9 billion. You're talking about year to date roughly outflows from that side of about 10 billion. But if you compare that again with our net foreign international reserve positions of 280 billion, it's something again that I think shows that our external vulnerability on that front is extremely low, and that our stability on the external front certainly remains intact. Another example of our resiliency on the external front is our low vulnerability to the possibility of another taper tantrum or a yield spike. A yield spike in global financial markets is not likely to have a high impact in Thailand for a couple of reasons. First, in terms of the transmission of a global yield spike into a yield spike in the domestic market in Thailand, Thailand's bond markets rely less on non-resident financing than what we see in other countries. So the transmission from a global spike to a local spike is not likely to be as marked or as sharp as one might see in other countries. But even if there were to be a local yield spike as a result, the transmission into the real economy is also likely to be muted. Why? First off, if we look, 90% of financing, private financing in Thailand is still bank-based. So only about 10% would and basically it's mostly the larger corporates, which this time around are quite solid. Most of the impact or burden of a local bond yield spike wouldn't have that much impact to the banks as a result of a possible global taper tantrum. And also the banks themselves are not likely to be hit that hard by a yield spike because, again, in Thailand, close to 97% of the banks finance themselves by deposits, not through wholesale, through the wholesale markets. So all that, I think, indicates again that Thailand is an economy that is likely to be quite resilient, much more resilient to the possibility of a taper tantrum than in many other countries. The second factor that I would point to that indicates our resilience has to do with our banking sector. Our banking sector remains sound. Capital ratios are quite high, 20% BIS ratios overall, and liquidity also remains quite high. Provisioning levels are also high relative to NPLs. So the banking sector remains highly liquid and very strong by most measures. And we've seen, very fortunately, that the banking sector has continued to function throughout the crisis, extending credit. We've seen credit growth grow in most areas, with one notable exception, which I'll discuss later, indicating that the banking sector, as we would like to see in this kind of crisis, is acting as a shock absorber and not a shock amplifier. The third area of resiliency that we see is on the public finance front. Our public finances remain sound, even though public debt to GDP ratios have come up during the crisis, as they have in all countries. But overall in Thailand, public debt to GDP ratios remain quite reasonable. We stand at about in the high 50s right now as a share of GDP, and indicates that the government has room available to engage in additional fiscal stimulus if it deems that it is necessary to do so. Other indicators, if you look at the ability of the country and the government to engage in more fiscal firepower, include the fact that if you look at 10-year borrowing rates on government debt right now, still remains quite low. The government now is able to borrow 10-year money at less than 1.7%. That's a much lower borrowing cost than we see in other countries in the region, and again reflects the fact that public finances are perceived to be sound, risks on that front relatively low, and liquidity quite high. And again, given the fact that our external vulnerability remains low, even if the additional borrowing by the government contributes to an increase in the current account deficit, again, given the overall strength of the foreign reserve picture in Thailand, I think the risk on the external front and the implications of additional public sector borrowing, if it is deemed to be necessary, remain quite low and quite limited. So all that indicates, I think, again, that even though we've been hit hard and harder than other countries, and that our recovery is likely to take longer and perhaps be more uneven than we see in other countries, the resilience of the economy is there, it's intact, and the downside risk of seeing like a sharp, a decline in terms of weaknesses stemming from weaknesses on the balance of payments front, on the banking front, or on the public finance front remain quite limited. So let me turn now to a second part of my remarks that I would like to share with you today, which is what we at the Bank of Thailand have been doing. And if I had to summarize or very briefly or shortly, I would say that the Bank of Thailand, we have taken, I think, what is a flexible and pragmatic approach to addressing the crisis. We are willing to do, have been willing to do, and continue and remain willing to do what it takes to get us out of this crisis. And the statement that we've been using internally is to say that all reasonable policy options are on the table. So what does that entail, and what has been part of our policy response to this unmitigated crisis that we face now. First and foremost, and very importantly, we've tried to ensure that financial conditions remain accommodative to support and facilitate the recovery. So we took early preemptive action, lowering policy rates until policy rates now stand at 0.5%, which is as low as they've ever been in Thailand, and lower than in many other countries in the region, to try to ensure that, again, that financial conditions aren't a constraint on the recovery. We've also taken steps to ensure that liquidity, aggregate liquidity in the system remains ample, and again, also is not a constraint to the economic recovery. However, while aggregate liquidity remains ample, and if you look at all the usual liquidity indicators that we would take a look at, liquidity coverage ratios at banks and whatnot, which would indicate adequate liquidity in the system, the low bond yields and whatnot, what we do see is that while the banking system has undertaken its shock absorber function and continue to extend credit to many sectors of the economy, we've seen credit growth, for example, remain positive for the large corporates. It's growing at about roughly ballpark about 4% year on year in the latest figures, and also continued credit growth extended to the retail or household sector. The area where we haven't seen as much credit growth as we would like is with the SME sectors. And again, that reflects increased perceptions of risk associated with the SME sectors, which have made banks reluctant to lend to the SMEs, despite, again, liquidity in aggregate being quite ample. So again, in terms of a policy response, I think we've taken a fairly flexible and pragmatic approach to this, and try to address the real constraints to credit growth to SMEs, and address the problem and issue of high perceived risk among SMEs by introducing a credit guarantee facility to accompany our lending facility to banks, to try to encourage banks to on-lend onto SMEs. We had in place initially what was called a soft loan facility, which was directed again to SMEs. We found that over time that facility was not being tapped as well as it should, and basically, put it blunt, as an analogy, the pipes were getting clogged. Again, I think we showed that we responded flexibly and pragmatically to the crisis. So what we did was then we undertook and issued a new emergency decree to put in place a new lending facility, a new SME credit guarantee facility with accompanying credit facility for banks to try to on-lend to these SMEs. And we're happy to say that we've seen good progress on that. We initially set a target that we wanted to see 100 billion baht extended through that facility in 6 months, and we're well on our way to achieving that target. And the latest figures stand at about 89 billion baht in credit going through that facility after about 4 odd months. That again, I think, is an example of the kind of pragmatic and approach, focus, and implementation that we at the Bank of Thailand have been willing to play. Another example of our flexible and pragmatic approach, and an indication perhaps of our willingness to step outside our usual comfort zone as a central bank is by introducing this other scheme in addition to the SME credit guarantee facility, which was an asset warehousing scheme. We recognized quite early on that certain sectors require a fairly targeted response in terms of their approach to debt restructuring. Certain sectors, like those that are hard hit by the tourism slowdown, not in a position to engage in what might we call usual debt restructuring, because with no tourists, a lot of them don't have any cash flow at all. So a more appropriate solution for them would be for them to be able to park their assets, to use that to basically pay down their debt, and then with the option again to be able to repurchase those assets back at a later date. in order to try to minimize the debt burdens that they would incur otherwise if they still had to hold on to the asset and the loans. So I think those provide you with some examples, some concrete illustrations of how we at the Bank of Thailand have tried to respond flexibly and pragmatically to the changing circumstances of the COVID crisis. Let me now turn on to the third part of my remarks today, which is what next? One thing that we'd like to do, I'd like to see, is a move from short-term blanket temporary measures like a debt moratorium to longer-term, more lasting, more targeted solutions like debt restructuring. Moratoria, I think, are a good response to something that is short, something that is severe, and something that is broad. But as we have seen in discussing the economic outlook, this crisis is likely to be long for us, the recovery likely to be very uneven for us, and it therefore requires a longer term and more targeted approach. So we'd like to encourage that we move from a solution of having debt moratoria in response to waves of infection causing a lockdown to, again, more lasting solutions like debt restructuring. So a few days ago, just very recently, we announced a series of initiatives and incentives, regulatory incentives, to try to encourage banks to undertake this kind of debt restructuring, which we feel is important for a lasting solution to the problems that we're facing. And we would like this debt restructuring to have the following 5 characteristics: to be longer in nature, to be broader, apply to a wider range of people, but at the same time, third, to be more targeted, to be more flexible, and to respond specifically, more appropriately to the very different circumstances faced by different kinds of borrowers. Because as we mentioned, again, nature of the recovery is quite uneven, and the crisis has hit different sectors in a very uneven fashion. We would like to make sure that these debt restructuring measures, as much as possible, try to encourage as many people as possible to survive and get through the crisis. The more debtors that survive, again, the better off the creditors will be. And lastly, and most importantly, very importantly, we would like to make sure that debt restructuring measures that are undertaken do not do so in a way that undermines in any way, shape, or form or exacerbates problems with moral hazard, creating adverse incentives, moral hazard problems as a way of or undertaking measures in trying to alleviate the crisis, but which end up contributing to moral hazard as the saying goes, the cure will be worse than the disease, and that's something, again, that we would be very cognizant of in implementing these new measures. So what about the longer term? At the same time, in addition to making sure that we get through this crisis, we at the Bank of Thailand are trying to make sure that we put in place the foundations for our longer lasting recovery beyond COVID, and making sure that we are in a place that we're well positioned to take advantage of the opportunities that will arise in a post-COVID world. Now, there are a lot of uncertainties in the world. It's difficult to see what's likely to happen or play out going forward in the future, but I think there are 2 things at least that we can comfortably say that will characterize the post-COVID world. We're likely to see the post-COVID world be greener than before, and also be more digital than before. So with those 2 things in mind, we at the Bank of Thailand are making sure that, at least from our side and the financial sector side, that Thailand is better positioned to take advantage of these opportunities in a greener and more digital world. So what kinds of things are we doing? I think first on green, I think as with many people, I think the IPCC report that came out last week was a wake-up call, a very loud one, sobering read, and I think highlights the need for much more effective and much more rapid action. That sense of urgency that we've been talking about for a long time actually needs to translate, I think, into much more concrete actions. On the global front, I am addressing, I'm cognizant that I'm addressing many people on the buy side, and I salute a lot of the very encouraging initiatives that happen on the global front. The net zero initiative among asset managers, I think, is a very good example of the kinds of things that needs to happen, both in terms of the scale and in terms of the extent of the involvement. And I think is a good example, again, of the kinds of things that need to happen here in Thailand. Thailand, I would argue, unfortunately, I think we have been lagging a bit in our response in terms of the climate crisis, and as a country that is likely to be hit very hard by the climate crisis. We're a country, again, that is, in terms of population and employment, quite significantly dependent on agriculture. About 30% of our labor force is tied to agriculture. So obviously, higher temperatures and that higher risk of drought and floods will hit the agriculture sector very high. We're a country, again, highly dependent on tourism. A lot of that is beach tourism, so any kind of substantial rise in sea levels and whatnot will hit our country very hard. So as a country that is very vulnerable to climate change, I think it is beholden upon us to take a much stronger initiative on the climate change front, on the green front. And on this, I welcome, again, a lot of the initiatives that happen in Thailand, especially in the capital markets. We've seen the Stock Exchange of Thailand initiate a welcome project on coming up with a Thailand Sustainability Index, trying to identify sustainable firms that are listed. We've seen our colleagues at the Securities Exchange Commission undertake welcome initiatives with ESG bonds, which have seen significant growth in Thailand as well. And I'd have to say that I like to see that progress on the banking side catches up to the welcome initiatives on the capital market side. I think it's fair to say, both in Thailand and globally, that the banking side has tended to lag, unfortunately, a bit. The green and climate initiatives that have been undertaken by capital market participants. So we at the Bank of Thailand will do our level best to try to encourage that to make sure that the banking sector catches up and does play its role as is needed. We launched and will build upon our responsible lending guidelines and practices. And the important next steps for us on the banking side in terms of the green initiative would be to try to improve disclosure, I think, which under any kind of scenario and any kind of initiative remains a critical building block, essential building block to make all the other stuff work. So disclosure, critical element. And aside from that, another very important and critical initiative is the development of a green taxonomy that is consistent across the financial sector, so that we don't end up working at cross purposes, and that we can leverage upon each other's efforts. And on this, I'm happy to say that Bank of Thailand has been working very closely with our colleagues at the Securities Exchange Commission, with the colleagues at the Office of the Insurance Commission, with the colleagues at the Stock Exchange of Thailand, and also with our colleagues at the Ministry of Finance to try to develop a consistent taxonomy in green that extends across the financial sector in Thailand. And also, we hope eventually that this will be a taxonomy that is consistent and aligned with across the region as well, within the ASEAN region. And I think this is particularly important because the climate challenge, I think in many ways, will be won or lost here in this region, in Asia. I think we've seen, while everybody has a lot to do, we've seen, I think, clear initiatives being taken in Europe, which, and obviously more needs to be done both in Europe and the United States and whatnot. But given where we are in our cycle of development and whatnot, a lot of the bulk of the climate challenge is going to take place here in Asia, not particularly within ASEAN itself, but also within broader Asia. So I think what happens here is important and will be relevant in affecting how successfully we respond, we collectively, globally, respond to the climate challenge. The second trend that we see that is very important and that we have to make sure that we are well positioned for is digital. And on this, I'm happy to report that we have made good progress, better progress, I think, than we have made on the green or climate front. And I think the Bank of Thailand, in particular, has been, I think, actively engaged all throughout. And I think not far. We haven't been behind the curve, to put it frankly, on this. I think we've demonstrated that in terms of outcomes, things that we've done, we haven't lagged others in this very, very important and increasingly important area to come. So putting in place the kind of digital infrastructure that we need to allow the kind of digital financial services that are likely to become more and more important in the future. That's been something that for us is top of mind and remains one of our key strategic priorities. So what have we done in this area? First off, I think in terms of, if you look at the area of digital payments, we were among, I think, the first countries to induce a standardized QR code to assist with payments. And we've seen a very, very good uptake on that. QR codes now in Thailand are in very, very broad use. And I'm happy to see that it's really helped to improve access and inclusion very broadly. We've seen, for example, even vendors use QR codes for payment purposes, and I think that's been a welcome development to try to address our long-standing issues in terms of trying to improve inclusion on the financial front. Aside from QR codes, we've made very, very good progress in terms of prompt pay, which is our electronic payments. And we've seen a very, very high uptake and usage of prompt pay, especially during the COVID crisis. And we've seen the number of transactions per person per year increase and reach an all-time high. We've extended this payments framework to cross-border as well. So we now have in place cross-border QR cross-border payments using QR with our neighbors. Put in place many of our neighbors, and in Cambodia and Vietnam, and also as far as Japan. And most recently, we have connected our fast payment system, Prompt Pay, with that of Singapore Pay Now, which was the first globally, the first fast payment linkage cross-border. And we've seen transactions on that, a very satisfactory uptake on that front as well. And as another indication, I think, of the opportunities in this area for us as a country, building upon this digital infrastructure that we put in place, we've seen a very rapid rise in usage of mobile banking applications in Thailand. Thai people love their mobile phones, and we've seen Thailand ranked #1 globally in terms of usage of mobile banking applications for 3 years in a row. And I think, again, this is an example of the kind of opportunities that I think are that may arise and that will come about as a result of putting in place the right kind of digital infrastructure to enable these things to happen. Aside from the initiatives I mentioned on the digital front, another important initiative that we are undertaking and have been undertaking and continue to undertake is that on CBDC, or central bank digital currency. We started off with wholesale CBDC, doing a pilot program with some of the corporates, undertaking a cross-border CBDC program, pilot program with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, which has been extended to include now People's Bank of China and the UAE, along with the involvement of the BIS. And in terms of the next phase of what we're looking forward to on the CBDC front is to undertake a retail CBDC pilot program. And we think that this will be an important program for us to try to address our longstanding pain points in the financial sector, especially with regards to efficiency, high fees in certain areas and whatnot, and even more importantly, in the areas of access and inclusion. So I think, again, with that, I think our initiatives on the green and digital front are an example of the kinds of things that we are doing, not just to, again, address the immediate problems facing us of getting out of the crisis, but also looking ahead, trying to put in place and laying the foundations for Thailand, the financial sector, and for Thailand to be well positioned to grow in the years following the crisis in the post-COVID landscape. We think that it's very important to put in place, laying the groundwork and the foundation, which will facilitate new things to appear. And it's those things, those new initiatives that will come about as a result of this new digital infrastructure that we put in place and the new opportunities provided by green, which I think will propel Thailand in its next phase of growth after the COVID crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for an insightful session from Dr. Sethaput. The next session will be Living in Next Normal, COVID-19 Lessons Learned and Future Directions by our panel of speakers comprising Dr. Solpon Iemsiri Thawan, Deputy Director General of the Department of Disease Control, Dr. Pisit Puapan, Director of Macroeconomic Policy Bureau of the Fiscal Policy Office, Dr. Sompravin Manprasert, Chief Economist and Executive Vice President of the Bank of Ayutthaya, and our moderator, Dr. Sarapon Tuliyasathian, Senior Executive Vice President and the Head of Corporate Strategy Division of the Stock Exchange of Thailand. Once again, questions can be submitted through the QR code shown on the screen. To provide you with some background of our panelists, our first panelist, Dr. Solpon Iemsiri Thawan, is a medical epidemiologist and has worked for the Ministry of Public Health for the past 27 years, starting from a community hospital in rural Thailand. On January 2020, he was appointed an incident commander for the COVID-19 situation management by the Director General of the Department of Disease Control. Since then, he has played a crucial role in COVID-19 pandemic response and mitigation at DDC. His vast experiences in public health service, as well as long-term collaboration with non-health network, have significantly contributed to the success of COVID-19 control. The second panelist, Dr. Pisit Puapan, is responsible for economic review, monitoring, forecast, and macroeconomic and fiscal policy analysis under the Ministry of Finance. He regularly meets with the IMF and credit rating agencies to hold policy discussion and dialogue on behalf of the ministry. Dr. Pisit has been delegated to work on various assignments within the ministry. His first assignment was with the Public Debt Management Office, responsible for bilateral loan negotiations. And our last panelist, Dr. Sompravin Manprasit. Dr. Sompravin was formerly an Associate Dean and Associate Professor at the Faculty of Economics, Chulalongkorn University. During the past years, he had experience in inter-industry economic modeling and policy research with various government agencies such as the NESDB, Bureau of the Budget, and the Ministry of Commerce.
Greeting from Bangkok. Welcome to the first session of the Thailand Focus 2021. The session is on living in the next normal, COVID-19, lesson learned, and future directions. During the next hour, we will hear directly from authorities and experts from both public and private sector on the most relevant questions today. What is the current COVID situation and how it impacts the economy? What are the government responses and how are its effectiveness? And what are the outlook and policy going forward at both macro and sectoral levels? I will organize this session in 2 rounds of questions. The first round will focus on the current situation, the effectiveness of measures, and what have we learned. The second round will focus on the outlook, the additional measure, if any, and the opportunities going forward. So without further ado, may I start the first round question to Dr. Sopon from the Ministry of Public Health. สวัสดีครับ Dr. Sopon ครับ Could you please update us on the current COVID situation and the measures that government has taken place to contain the situation? How effectiveness are these measures and what is your thought on this? Please.
Good morning and thank you, Dr. Solapon, for your introduction. I'd like to share with you the situation of evolving COVID-19 pandemic. As we know, today the world, including Thailand, is facing the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is a very important situation since the latest outbreak in many countries caused by the Delta variant. May I have my slide on the screen? If we look at the number of reported cases around the world, every day we have seen 500,000 cases, and also some of them die of the disease, around 10,000 cases. Thailand is also facing the same pandemic. We have experiencing the COVID-19 Delta variant since early July. And as we see on the slide, the peak in Thailand just passed last week. Even though we are on the downward trend, but we still have 20 cases reported on the daily basis, and around 200 to 300 cases of them die of the disease every day. However, with the great effort from the government and all the people in the society, all the public and private sectors, we believe that the situation of COVID-19 pandemic will be under the control in the very near future. Looking at the trend of the COVID-19 globally and also in Thailand, we have seen the sign of the decreasing number of cases over the time. If we go to the next slide, some of the key factors that can help mitigating the impact of the COVID-19. Thailand has gone through many measures, starting from the strict preventive measures in the public health, and also some of the travel restriction in the country and also internationally. So if you look at the effect of the COVID-19 response in Thailand, 2 months ago when we started the lockdown measures, the country have faced the high number of cases during the last 2 months until last week when we see the sign of improvement. Another factor is the vaccination coverage. We have vaccinated people in Thailand, both Thai and foreigners, starting from late February this year. However, the high number of doses have been administered in early June. So until now, we have vaccinated over 21 million population, and this is about 30% of the people in Thailand who received the first dose, and around 10% of the Thai people have received 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccines. Looking at the number in the table, we have a good plan to procure and vaccinate more people in the next 4 months before the end of 2021. So the number of vaccines will be increasing and also have more vaccine that efficacious to prevent the COVID-19. For example, we have more Pfizer vaccines in the last quarter of this year, and also AstraZeneca vaccines. However, in certain location, we also have Sinopharm and also Sinovac vaccine for people. But right now, I would say that Thailand is able to secure over 1 million doses of the vaccines to cover at least 50 million people who live in Thailand. And this could be enough for the herd immunity building in the next 4 months. So I hope that the figure will help us to understand the current situation and also the near future. And I have one more slide regarding the Phuket sandbox. Please go to the next slide, please. Starting from 1st of July, the Thai government implemented the Phuket sandbox. This is the model that we would like to show to the world that we can have the safe travel and presence in Thailand, starting from Phuket before extending to other cities. And the figure show that we have over 24,000 visitors alive in Phuket, and some of them only a small number. For example, 70 of them detected the COVID virus. However, most of them have very mild symptoms, and some of them have no symptoms, so they can spend time in Phuket and have activities as normal, but under the surveillance of the local health officer. And the government periodically evaluate this project and very satisfied with the outcome so far. So we will extend the project to other tourist attractions and other cities. In the next slide, we will see that in the slide we have Phuket as the main city, but the tourists also have an opportunity to travel to other cities. For example, Krabi, Phang and PP Island, and also Koh Yao Island, for example, and also Samui on the east coast of Thailand. So, and this project has been proved so far that it's safe and also provide the good example to other cities in the way that we can make the economic recovery faster. So this is something that I like to share with you. And if you have any question, please feel free to ask later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sopon. Dr. Sopon has given us some information, very useful information on 4 points. The first is on that the new cases of COVID seems to be leveling off. So we are maybe at the peak. The second is that we are on the progress of vaccination for the country. At the moment, for the population who got the first dosage of vaccine is roughly almost 30%. We also reaching the herd immunity sometime in the next 4 months, given the availability of the various vaccine that we have in place. And very interestingly, Thailand is implementing Phuket model sandbox, which is a way to have a contained and manageable COVID situation to promote the tourism within the certain area. We will get back to this on the second round. So may I now turn to Dr. Pisit. Now that we have the update on the public health situation, could you please update us on the current economic situation? How has the COVID affected the economy? What are the measures that the governments have in place and how effective are they? And what about the fiscal situation? Thank you so much, Dr. Pisit.
Thank you, Dr. Sarapon. So I would like to brief on the economic situation and outlook for Thailand, and also what are the policy that the Ministry of Finance and the Thai government has been doing to deal with the COVID-19, and also the longer term policy after the COVID. I think on the recent economic situation, on the next slide, we can see that the impact on the Thai economy from the COVID last year, the economy contracted by 6.1%. But I have to say that take us all back to last year. I think many people expected the Thai economy to contract 8 to 10%. So I think even we look at last year, the economic performance was better than what we expected. And looking at this year, the first quarter GDP showed the recovery of by 7.5%. I think this is above the market consensus of 6.4%. So you can see that the Thai economic recovery turned out to be better than what we expected in the beginning of the year. But right now we are dealing with the current wave of the COVID-19 spreading in Thailand. But as highlighted by the finance minister and the Bank of Thailand governor, that our economic fundamental is strong. So when we look at all the economic numbers, public debt to GDP, the profile of public debt to GDP in Thailand. So our current public debt to GDP is at the moment 55% of GDP. Still compared to other countries, Thailand has a better fiscal position compared to other countries. So I think this is quite good that we can use fiscal policy to support the economy. And we have been using fiscal policy to support the economy since the COVID-19 started beginning of last year. And most of our public debt are internal debt, baht denominated debt, and long-term debt. And also other indicator, unemployment remain low, even the most recent number of unemployment show improvement. So I think during the peak of the unemployment was in the middle of last year. So I think looking at the moment, unemployment rate in Thailand remain low, inflation remain low. And as highlighted by the Bank of Thailand governor, that our international reserve is quite high compared to reserve to short-term external debt, which is the indicator that rating agencies, when they come to Thailand, they look at. Right now is above 3.4%. So I think this shows the word that the BOT governor used, the resiliency of the Thai economy. On the next slide, I think the most recent economic indicator that was the major one that was announced by the government yesterday, the export. So I think you can see that right now the Thai economy has been supported by the strong recovery of the export of goods. So the July export number show continued strong growth by 20.3%, and the first 7 months of the year export value expand by 16%. So you can see that the export has been the supporting factor for the Thai economy so far. And on the next slide, now we come to the economic outlook. I would like to share you the Ministry of Finance. We announced the economic outlook for this year back in July to be 1.3% for the overall real GDP growth for this year. And next year, we expect the recovery of the Thai economy by 4 to 5%. And I think we can compare that to other national authority, NESDC and the Bank of Thailand. I think we all share similar view that this year the economy will continue the recovery, and we should be able to achieve some growth this year, and with stronger recovery next year. And as highlighted by Dr. Sopon, that in terms of the new infection in Thailand, that we expect to be peaking at this time and in the coming months. So that means in our economic assumption for the growth of 2021 and 2022, I think the major assumption will be the coming out from the COVID-19. I think we expect that by the end of the year, the COVID-19 situation should improve, and going to next year, I think that will lead to the reopening of the country. So I think we expect the next year growth to be stronger momentum for with the gradual reopening of the country, with the Phuket Sandbox as the first initiative by the government. On the next slide, I think in terms of the fiscal policy to support the economy, the major one, the new money that the government inject to the economy is since April last year is under the 1 trillion baht program. 1 trillion baht is about 6% of GDP. So you can see that direct spending from the government account for a sizable stimulus program. And so far, I would like to say that the disbursement is about 83%. So that means out of the 1 trillion baht, there remain about 170 billion baht in the money that will be spent by the government in the coming months under the 1 trillion baht program. So if you look at the various policy, the objective under the 1 trillion baht is the medical resolution of the COVID-19, compensation, rehabilitation, and the recovery and stimulating the domestic economy, and various programs that I think people are aware of under the initiative by the government, whether it be the co-payment program, the Rao Chana program, and the first program that deal with the COVID-19 back last year, all use the funding from the 1 trillion baht program. So I think overall broad benefit has been achieved under the 1 trillion baht program. So we can see that 48.5 million people benefit from the program. And we can see that the economic impact, the positive economic impact that the 1 trillion baht program has on the economy to handle the COVID-19 situation. Looking forward on the next slide, I think as we all know that the COVID-19 will be with us for some time. So the government introduced additional borrowing on the next slide, the 500 billion baht program. So I think this is the additional money in addition to the 1 trillion baht. And the government has already approved 65 billion baht under the new borrowing 500 billion baht. So there remain about 400 34 billion baht to be spent, to be allocated. So I think so you can see that in terms of the fiscal resources that the government has under to deal with the COVID-19, so far we have already generated the borrowing plan for 1 trillion baht and the 500 billion baht. So overall, we plan to use 1.5 trillion baht under the existing fiscal policy program to deal with the COVID-19. On the next slide, in terms of the budget framework, we can see that the Parliament is just recently debate on the budget framework for the fiscal year 2022, next fiscal year. So you can see, as highlighted by the table, that the Ministry of Finance and the government will continue to pursue fiscal policy expansion to support the economy going into next year. On the lastly, I think on the next slide, I think we can also look at the medium-term policy. I think we all know that Thailand, we need to upgrade our industry, upgrade our economic production. So the government continue to support the Eastern Economic Corridor Program and the targeted industry, the 12 targeted industries. So these are the policy that I would like to share with you in the first round in terms of the economic fundamental in Thailand remain strong, and the government fiscal policy has been supportive of the economic recovery. And we also continue to use the fiscal expansion continue to the next fiscal year 2022, and the medium-term policy to promote the investment and to upgrade the Thai industry. So these are the policy that I would like to share with the investor at the Thailand Focus today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pisit. In his first round, is quite packed with information. But summary, we learned that the impact of COVID has resulted in negative growth in 2020, but it's much less than expected given Thailand's resiliency and the fiscal room that can implement the fiscal policy. Dr. Pisit has highlighted that the growth largely come from export as well as some of the fiscal stimulus. And the fiscal stimulus is quite broad-based, covering about 48 million Thai people. That's about 2/3 of Thai population, and it's quite sizable. 1 trillion baht at the moment, and additional 0.5 trillion baht in total, roughly around $50 billion that is coming. In addition to the stimulus, Dr. Pisit also highlighted that we also do not neglect the longer-term issue, such as the new industry that he will cover in the next round. So let me turn to Dr. Sombavin. Now that we have the picture from both the public health and economy and the macro level, could Dr. Sombavin elaborate on the impact on the sectoral level of some industry? Which sector has been affected? Which sector has been able to adopt or opportune from this situation? Please, Dr. Sombavin.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sorapon. The impact of COVID-19 outbreak has tremendously affected the Thai economy. Yet each sector has been impacted differently. Let me move on to my page number 2. And since the channels of transmission of this crisis to economic impact started from shutdown in tourism and related industry, then as we know that social distancing caused supply disruption in some manufacturing industry. And once the shutdown is long enough, income effect kicks in. Lower aggregate demand led to further negative feedback loop and caused downward spiral of supply-demand interaction, which further suppressed consumption and other related industry. And I present to you here the results that we calculated since last year. We order the impact from the most negative on the left-hand side to the right-hand side. An orange dot represents the lowest point of revenue in each industry. And the yellow tab represents the pace of recovery of each sector from the end of 2020 to the end of 2021. And as we can see from the chart here, the most negative sectors are ones that with the direct hit, income would drop around 30 to 50%. And these sectors are air transportation, hotel, restaurants, followed by recreation, auto dealers, and business services. And you can see on the far right, we can see that the most resilient sectors are mainly necessary goods, pandemic-induced industries such as food and telecommunication. And when we look at the pace of recovery, the difference between the yellow tab, we also find that the hardest hit sector are also the one that latest to recover too. For example, by the end of 2021, this year, air transport and hotel restaurant are still lost their income as much as 40 to 25% respectively. Next page. And looking ahead, we feel that the recovery of tourism and related industry will take some time before getting back to pre-COVID level. As you know, that the key determinants on how Thailand could reopen itself depends on how fast vaccination progress is, not only in Thailand, but also in other countries too, especially our tourism markets. For this year, Krung Sri Research expect the number of foreign tourists to plunge to around 150,000 and 2.5 million next year. And as you know, largely caused by severe outbreak of the Delta variants, slower than expected vaccination progress and efficacy of the available vaccine. And on the right-hand side, we would see gradual improvement from mid of next year. Why we believe so? Because at that time, Thailand should reach its herd immunity and situations in other Asian countries should improve. And the pace on the top chart comparing to the bottom chart on the right-hand side, domestic tourism would recover faster than foreign tourists. It would take another 3 to 4 years for domestic and foreign tourists to get back to pre-COVID at 40 million visitors. And let me elaborate this a little bit more on page 4. For Thai tourism and hotel industry, we believe that there are 4 phases to recovery road out of this COVID crisis. We call it 4 Bs. Begin, boost, bubble, and build back. At the beginning phase, the key focus would be interventions to build confidence in domestic tourists. Second phase, we would focus on boosting domestic tourists and long-term expat in Thailand. And third, this is critical step where we should create travel bubbles with targeted foreign partners, and it involves a think-through process of traveling journey as well as arrangement in health-related issue. And the last phase, the phase that we go back to pre-COVID. Tourism after COVID will be different than before, so we should focus to improve our capacity, transform safety and healthcare services, and have effective purpose-led transformation. In fact, if you look at this chart, at the beginning of this year, we thought that we were about to change from phase 2 to phase 3. But having the Delta variant has made us fall back to the phase 1 again. It will take time, but given the vaccine we rolled out gradually in coming months and the cure of the virus is on its way, I believe that the risk of falling back once again is lower. Next page. Although the reopening is on its way, as I mentioned consistently that things will be different. Tourism industry needs to transform itself to the world after COVID. We highlight there are 4 factors that would shape future of tourism and hotel industry in Thailand. First, demographic change and aging society, meaning people live longer. So at one point in time, we are facing with many generations. Right now, we have, for example, baby boomer, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha. There are 5 at least generations at the time. So each of them has its own preference and taste. Therefore, tourism industry would need to serve more variety of consumer. Second, because tourism is luxury goods, as you know, income sensitive. And rise of middle income class in emerging markets will also contribute to higher demands of tourism. Moreover, people would prefer personalized product, and demand for tourism will be fragmented. And the third role, technology has become part of traveling. We familiar with mobile internet navigation system. It changed the way that we explore and experience travel. Therefore, tourism industry should utilize this capacity to better serve customers. And lastly, pandemic had made us more concerned about health. Previously, we concerned about health when we get sick, but now people are more concerned about prevention. Right now, we concern about health not only when we get sick, but all the time in our daily life. And this will apply for change in consumer behavior in tourism industry too. Next page. My last point during first round would be related to strategy that would help tourism industry to get through this crisis. There are 4 of them on the right-hand side. First, it's the crisis response strategy. We need to seek for sufficient liquidity. Alternative revenue stream is important. That we still yet wait for normal business to get back. And second, demand response strategy. We should selective design right strategy for targeted customer. And the most important thing, we should ensure business flexibility during this huge uncertain episode. And third, it's about medium-term transformation. The COVID crisis taught us we are living in a VUCA world. Therefore, managing risks, including diversification of market, expanding portfolio, reduce fixed asset would help mitigate risk in the future. The fourth is more about longer term. We should look out for new business opportunity. Finding partnership would be a good strategy for expand business. To summarize my point for this first round, tourism industry is the hardest hit from this COVID crisis. However, given mega trends and change in landscape of tourism industry, there is also a huge opportunity going forward. And in all, tourism industry should transform itself to the world after COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sombavin. As you summarize, the sectoral impact is quite vastly different from sector to sector, and tourism is quite a big part of the Thai economy. Dr. Sethaput, in the beginning of today's speech, he mentioned that it has 21% of local employment. Dr. Sombavin outlined that eventually tourism will recover. It will take 4 steps, and given our experience, we will continue to do so given as we progress on the vaccination. So may I turn back to the second round of the question that focus on the outlook. I would like to ask Dr. Sopon, could you please help paint the picture of the public health next year? Do we need the 3rd or the 4th booster vaccine? Can you talk more a little bit on how effectiveness of the Phuket sandbox and whether we have planned to expand to other areas and how would we do it? So please, Dr. Sopon, please. Dr. Sopon, could you please turn on the mic, please?
Thank you very much for the question, Dr. Sorapon. If you look at the vaccination rate, right now we vaccinated around 500,000 doses a day. Most of them go with the criteria, for example, the elderly and people with chronic diseases. However, if we can keep like 500,000 doses a day, we would vaccinate like 12 to 15 million doses a month. And within the next 4 months, we would be able to achieve the 70% coverage. However, we also have a concern. Those who receive 2 doses of Sinovac vaccine early this year in March and April, the Ministry of Public Health have a plan to give the booster dose at the end of the year when we have large volume of vaccine available in the country. So look at the number of vaccine doses procured by the Thai government. We have over 100 millions, but we also have some vaccine procured by the private sector. For example, Moderna, that will be in Q4 of this year. A small number of doses will be available in October, and the rest will be in November and December. So if we look at this number of vaccine, we quite confident that we can get the people in Thailand to reach the herd immunity. And by this kind of strategy, plus the universal prevention by people and also workplace measures, we will be able to prevent the return of the big wave of the COVID-19 in the country. So if you look at the Phuket sandbox, it is quite amazing that we can prevent the transmission of the COVID-19 among the international traveler. When I show the number of 24,000 visitors, all of them came from overseas abroad, and there is no transmission among them. However, we have sporadic cases of COVID-19 in Phuket that we can manage to control the situation. Most of them receive vaccine in Phuket, even higher in terms of percentage, reached 90% of the vaccination coverage. So if we look at the increasing number of arriving travelers in Phuket, it's more crowding at this time. So the government provide additional options for them to travel to other cities in the south. As I said, PP Island, Kok Yao Island, and some provinces surrounding in the 100 kilometers radius. And if we can make the cities safer, not only Phuket but also other nearby cities, we can have more wider area safe for the tourists, and each tourist spend around 50,000 baht when they stay in Phuket for hotel, food, and other activities. So the number I got is around 1.2 billion baht so far from the 1st of July. So I think in the future, if the Phuket sandbox expand to cover other cities, we can see the positive impact of the safe travel on the economic recovery.
Thank you, Dr. Sopon, for clarifications on the outlook of the public health and policy going forward. May I now turn to Dr. Kusit for the second round question. Do we need additional stimulus? And what about the fiscal sustainability? Can we afford additional fiscal stimulus? And moreover, do government have in place measures to support new industries that we want to promote in the future?
Yes, I think, thank you, Dr. Sarapon, for the question. I think in terms of the fiscal stimulus, whether we need additional fiscal stimulus it will be decided by the policymaker. But I would like to, as I presented in my previous presentation, at the moment, we have under the 1 trillion baht, some remaining amount to be spent, and under the 500 billion baht, some about 440 billion baht, under the 500 billion baht to be allocated. So at the moment, we still have the ongoing fiscal resources to deal with the COVID-19. But I think, yes, I think investor may know that there's some discussion about whether the government should introduce additional stimulus program. But I think that will be decided by the policymaker. But I can reassure that the fiscal position in Thailand, as I mentioned, 55% of GDP at the moment, and our public debt limit is 60%. But I think investors that come to the Ministry of Finance always ask this question about 60% public debt to GDP limit. I would like to explain that this limit is not written into the law, but it's just the guideline regulation by the Fiscal Policy Committee chaired by the Prime Minister. So this limit can be reviewed and revised, readjust according to the appropriate situation. So again, whether Thailand will need the additional stimulus program will depend on how we, as Dr. Sompravin mentioned, how we going forward, how the economy recover and coming out from the COVID-19. And we get the good picture from the Ministry of Public Health, Dr. Sopon, that the going forward, I think many people expect the peak of the COVID-19 to be coming soon, and then gradually we should be able to, with the vaccination program, we should be able to coming out. So I think the government will have to balance between the short-term COVID-19 and the medium-term development, because the fiscal policy will continue to play the major role for Thailand dealing with the COVID-19 and the medium-term development plan, as highlighted by the finance minister this morning, the six strategy. One, improving the inequality by promoting equal opportunity. Two, continuing with the infrastructure investment. Three, reducing the greenhouse gas, climate change. Four, restructuring competitive policy. Five, promoting future industry, as the Dr. Sarapon question. So I think six, very important, promoting the SME competitiveness. And I think this will, the fifth and sixth objective will directly go to the realm of stock exchange of Thailand, the role of the capital market to promote the future, the place for the new resource of fund for the SME, the financing channel for the public and private sector to raise the new fund to investment, the leveraging leading company that will promoting them to become regional and global corporation, transparent and sustainable development goal, financial exchange using up-to-date technology, participating different investor group, and lastly, a place for regulatory and financial transparency and minority investor protection. So these are the programs that I think the Ministry of Finance and the government and all the financial authority are working to promote the medium-term development of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Visit. May I ask the second round question to Dr. Sompravin? You have painted some picture on the tourism sector, but what about other sectors? How has different other sectors evolved post-pandemic? How have they adapted, or what could be the next big things for Thailand?
Thank you, Dr. Sarapon. Actually, interesting question. Let me turn to my page 7. And although we have been bombarded by this COVID crisis, let me stress that underlying this, there is industry transformation going on in the world. Things will change. Mega trends, pandemic-induced activities have accelerated transition. And there are both global and domestic factors that actually shape industry landscape going forward. Under global perspective, divergence of economic recovery, global value chain transformation, servicification will shape external demand-driven activities. Domestically, pandemic has induced some growing industry, coupled with government infrastructure projects. Both traditional, new infrastructure projects will crowd in private investment in long term. And this chart shows that the pandemic has induced a rise of three promising sectors in Thailand. First, digital businesses from accelerating adoption in digital technology, as we have this MS team and digital connectivity through this conference. And other related industry should include robotics, automation, data center, cloud, and digital services. Second group of sector related to medical sector. It actually benefited from rising hygiene and wellness related trend. And sectors or industry in this area would be private hospital, medical devices, and medical tourism. And third group on the right-hand side, the rise of connectivity in regional countries and logistic networks reduced demands for smart logistics, which related to transportation, aviation, and modern warehouse. In fact, there has been evidence of the rising trend and investor interest in this business in Thailand. For example, you can see a number in the box below that investment value for digital business apply for tax benefits surged by 120% during the first half of this year. And even more solid in medical sector where investment value of the BOI application surged by 230% during the same period. Next slide. And as I mentioned consistently, industry transformation and changing global supply chain will shake up the outlook of production activities going forward. At Krungศรี Research, we have identified 6 sectors that Thailand has potential in years to come. Our conclusion based on our sectoral analysis, looking at strength, government support, structure for each industry in Thailand. And we list out on the left-hand side of this diagram, there are 6 of them. First, agriculture and food. Second, high-tech industry. Third, construction and real estate. Fourth, hotel, healthcare, and modern trade and telecommunication. And lastly, logistics. You can see the details of related business on the right-hand side diagram, but I will not go into detail. Next page. So let me step back a bit and look at a country as a whole. At Krungศรี Research, we actually have calculated an index called Sectoral Potential Index. We collect data from all over the world, from OECD, 46 countries, and we found that Thailand is actually ranked in the middle of all. At the table, we are number 35 in this chart, and Thailand is also ranked number 2 in ASEAN countries. Next page. Although 35 rank seems not to be high, but if we look into details by sector, there are 7 industries that Thailand is ranked in the top 15 of the world. As you can see from this chart, from the top, the green one, for example, coke and refined petroleum is ranked number 9 in the world. Rubber and plastic also ranked number 9. And other industry, including F&B, healthcare, recreation, wholesale, retail, textile, respectively, are in the top 15 of the world. But where we are going from here, it depends on how do we do with ourselves. There is industry transformation. We are lucky enough to have good foundation of industry development over the past 30, 40 years, but we need to leverage our resources so that we can move on to the next level. My last slide, trying to point out and show the example here. And, you know, industry development is not easy. At industry level, factors that shape sectoral potential are different among industry. This chart, we trying to, you know, calculate and find the right strategy for each industry. Let me explain just 2 examples here. First, for motor vehicle, we should move up a bit upstream on the supply chain, utilizing technology R&D and find potential partners, for example, with Japan, China, and Indonesia. For healthcare, we have much potential if we move downward along the supply chain and seek partnership, expand business to Indonesia and Vietnam. It will opening up more opportunity in this business. In summary, let me stress again that we are in transition. Disrupting world give us both challenges and opportunity. But given our capability and resources, I strongly believe that there are much more opportunities than challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sobowin. We now have many questions from the floor. I will try my best to organize a question to each of you in a summary manner. So the first set of questions may ask Dr. Sopon. There are questions about whether the current measures is enough to ensure herd immunity by the end of the year. That's the first question. The second question, I think you have answered, is that for the people who have vaccinated with Sinovac, will they need additional doses? The third question is whether it would be possible to get the second generation vaccine or Moderna or Pfizer faster than the schedule that Dr. Sopon has shown on the screen. And the last question for you is whether Thailand would consider new investment licensing arrangement for the vaccination manufacturing in Thailand. So please.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the current measure is quite effective when we look at the number of new cases start to go down. However, the vaccination is a key factor. If we look at the number of vaccine doses procured in the country, it's quite good in terms of have the variety of the vaccine. When people talk about the second generation of the vaccine, they should know that all of them are under the research and development. There is no currently available second generation vaccine in the market. So every country is waiting for the second generation and it would be available next year. Thailand also have a plan to procure second generation vaccine. We talk with Pfizer and also Moderna and AstraZeneca for the second generation vaccine. The government plan to buy 120 million doses of vaccine next year. This is after the first 100 million doses. So there is no, I think at this time we focus on vaccinating everyone who are vulnerable and everyone who needs the vaccine at this time. And if we look at the people who got 2 doses of Sinovac, it's only 3.5 million people. 500,000 of them are healthcare workers who already received booster dose in the last several weeks. So only 3 million doses are people. Maybe some of them are in Bangkok, in major cities. So they would definitely get the booster dose by the end of this year when we have more than enough vaccine available. And the last question regarding the investment in the new vaccines, Thailand also have several, maybe I would say that researchers working on the clinical trial of the vaccine. For example, the mRNA vaccine developed by the researcher group at the Chulalongkorn University. They are also doing the first clinical trial, and we expect to see the outcome, the result early next year. So if it's successful, we would have to invest by the government to manufacture this vaccine in the country. But don't forget AstraZeneca manufacturer in Thailand, also a part of the collaboration between the AstraZeneca Oxford University and the SAM Bioscience Thailand. This is also served as the local production. That's why we can secure many million doses of AstraZeneca this year and also next year. Thank you.
Two more questions related to Dr. Pisit and Dr. Somperwin. The first question to Dr. Pisit is about the economic impact of the Phuket model, whether it has impact or whether it can be modified or increased in scale in the national level. And the second related question to Dr. Somperwin is about the future of tourism industry. If we have the COVID situation live with us in near futures, how will the industry transform itself, or what are the necessary measures in your opinion? So the first is Dr. Pisit on the impact of Phuket.
Thank you. I think the impact from the Phuket model is Phuket sandbox model is the start of the reopening of Thailand to the foreign traveler. So I think we look at as reported by Dr. Sopon that from July 1st we have about 24,000 foreign visitors to the Phuket sandbox already. So I think gradually this will pick up the momentum as the coming months forward. But I think the government and the tourism ministry that I have a meeting with the tourism ministry, they take a medium-term view that Phuket sandbox is the initial step for the Thailand reopening, and then it will expand to different area, the foreign tourism, Samui plus model, Krabi, Phang Nga, Chiang Mai, Pattaya, Buriram, and eventually Bangkok and Saam Hua Hin. So these are the medium-term plan in for the Thailand reopening. Then I think ultimately, if Dr. Saurapon asked about the impact of the tourism, foreign tourism on Thailand under the Samui model, I think the big impact will be coming for the year 2022. That the Bank of Thailand expects the bigger tourism, foreign tourism recovery. The Ministry of Finance, we expect next year the foreign tourism to be 10 to 12 million people. So I think we can see the big rebound in foreign tourism next year. Again, 10 million foreign tourism is nowhere near what we had pre-COVID, 40 million, close to 40 million. But still, it's a step forward that we are coming out of the COVID-19. Last point that I would like to share is the tourism policy for Thailand. I think the tourism ministry is preparing the strategy, the medium-term strategy at the moment. So I think the important point that we have to remember is that tourism in Thailand is still very much concentrated. Our team study, our macro team study, we find that it's very clustered in 5 areas. The northern part, the Chiang Mai area, the Bangkok and the vicinity area, the eastern part, the southern part, and the upper Isan, upper northeastern area. So there are 5 clusters of the tourism, foreign and domestic. And there's not much spillover of the tourism benefit to the nearby province in Thailand. So I think this is the critical strategy issue that if we would like to use tourism as the backbone of the Thailand economic development, we need to link the tourism to different province, networking between different provinces, which Dr. Sopon mentioned, the Phuket Sandbox is trying to link the foreign tourists to other provinces around Phuket. So I think this is and this will open the new tourism market in Thailand that will attract more travelers coming instead of coming to the same place every year. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pisit. Very interesting point that tourism in Thailand is concentrated in just a few clusters. That means that we could potentially multiply the sandbox to this cluster and cover most of the bulk of the tourists. But still, 10 million tourists is still quite different from the 40 million that we have in number of tourists prior to COVID. So this leads to the second questions to Dr. Somberwin, that if tourism going to remain like this in the new normal, what should we do?
Thank you, Dr. Sarpon. Actually, as I mentioned before, tourism industry need to transform itself. But my views on long term of this sector is still positive, very positive, especially for Thailand. And one of the major concern or our travelers value the most is health concern. And as you can see that given that Thailand has also a very strong healthcare system and healthcare sector, and this can connect very well to this services industry, including tourism, restaurant, and hotel. And in the end, we would see the merging in sector between tourism and healthcare. And again, when we look at infrastructure in Thailand, we have to prepare well. And I'm sure that we would be able to leverage ourselves across this sector. And having said that, in long term, as I mentioned, we have a rising middle income class that would lead to more domestic travelers in Thailand. And around us, there is also a rising middle income class in the region. And this new rich, has been research and evidence that Thailand is one of their preferred destination too. So yeah, to summarize, I feel very positive after COVID. The tourism industry in Thailand will get back to normal. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we are running out of time. So may I give just the last round for all the speaker, or just the last word that you want to leave for the investors? Just any few minutes, last few minutes word of thoughts. May I start with Dr. Sarpon?
Thank you very much. Since the situation is under control and we anticipate that the number of cases will go down, the number of vaccination coverage will go up, the government will have to make a decision to ease all the activities, particularly in the provinces that already control the outbreak situation very well. So if you look at Thailand, around 20 provinces have number of cases go up and down, but the majority of the provinces in Thailand has controlled the outbreak situation quite well. So we will see something change next week. For example, relaxing certain activity, allowing people to spend time on their daily life, but with the new normal, safer, and also want them to be aware of the importance of the vaccination. So for me, there is a big hope for the next couple months when we can let people to live in the new normal or next normal life and stay safe under the current situation that we believe that COVID will be with us for a long time. So we have to cope ourselves in the way that we can return to our life as before or close to as before. Thank you.
Dr. Pisit, any last word?
Yes, I think investor should understand that should look beyond the COVID-19 situation, because I think we expect the government expect the recovery next year, and with the information that I share today should give some confidence in terms of the economic fundamental of Thailand, the current account, the international reserve position, the public debt to GDP. So these are the strong economic fundamental that should allow the Thailand to recover after the COVID, and the medium-term policy that our strength in the service sector, in the tourism sector, and the upgrading of the manufacturing sector. I think this will support the Thailand economic growth in the medium term. Thank you.
ดร.สมวินครับ
Thank you ครับ Actually, my last word again go back to industry transformation. Behind all of this COVID, there will be rise and fall of industry in the future. So good investment strategy is selective. But luckily, the COVID crisis actually make it clear for us. It actually accelerates the rise of industry in the future, and it stressed the fall of some certain industry. And I have elaborated in my talk today. So things will change, and invest wisely, and we would see benefits of all this information. Thank you.
So stay safe, stay positive, and invest wisely. Okay. So on behalf of the Stock Exchange of Thailand, we would like to thank the participants, Dr. Sopon Siri Thaworn, Deputy Director General of the Department of Disease Control, Ministry of Public Health, Dr. Pisit Puapan from the Fiscal Policy Office, Ministry of Finance, and Dr. Sombavin Manpaser from Bank of Ayutthaya for the fruitful and insightful informations. For the audience, thank you for being with us. You can download all the PowerPoint from the participant speakers from our website, and please stay tuned. The seminar is finished for the morning session, but we do have the afternoon session very interestingly on the adaptation of the big business, the innovative business, as well as the sustainability issue starting at 1 p.m. Bangkok time. So thank you very much and stay safe. สวัสดีครับ
Thank you all panelists for a very interesting and informative session, and thank you all attendees for attending the morning session of Thailand Focus 2021. Our afternoon session will start at 13 o'clock Bangkok time.